Hey friends, David Schimmel here. In my previous video, I showed you how to turn a drum loop into a full drop. Today, we'll build on that knowledge by introducing a vocal sample and then processing it so that it can serve as the lead sound for our drop. We'll also cover some of the genre conventions of techno, so let's get into it. Alright, since we're making techno, let's set the tempo to 136. And let's start with the kick drum. So I'm going to insert a new drum rack on my MIDI channel. And let me add this kick from Cymatics here. It sounds like this. Now, not all subgenres of techno are the same, but in a lot of them you get this really hard, distorted kick. And to get that sound, we're going to add a saturator right after the kick drum. So grab one here. And we're just going to turn the volume up, make sure that it's in the drum rack, so it's just being applied to the kick drum. And let's take the drive up a bit, and this will start to add some crunch and grit to the sound. And let me make a 4 on the floor beat here, just so we don't have to keep pressing the note ourselves over and over again. There we go. All right. You can hear now that those higher harmonics are starting to come out. So that's a pretty good spot, and let's turn down the output gain to compensate because we only want our kick at around -9 decibels, let's say. -8.5. All right, perfect. The next thing that you hear a lot in techno songs is this kind of low frequency rumble. And there's several ways to do that, but the way we're gonna do it is we're gonna add a reverb after the kick. So grab a reverb and make sure that the low cut is turned on so we don't get too much low frequency mud. And now, this isn't how we're gonna leave it, but let me show you what this sounds like. Doesn't really sound that great, and part of the reason is that the reverb is playing at the same time as the kick drum hit, so it's kind of interfering with the punchy transient of the kick. So to solve this, we're going to use our old friend side chaining, so that when the kick drum hits, the reverb tail is going to duck out of the way and our kick transient will come through nicely. So select the reverb effect and press Ctrl G to group it. Then rename the chain to reverb and bring the dry wet all the way up to 100%. We're going to now right click here and say create chain and rename this one to dry. So we have one channel on our audio effect rack that's just the kick drum, and then the other one is the reverb tail. And that sounds like this. Still not great, so let's add in the compressor for that side chaining effect. We'll put it right after the reverb. And then open the sidechain menu, enable it, select audio from drum rack, and then set it to grime kick pre-effects. Now we can tweak the threshold to get the sort of rhythmic pumping sound that we want. All right, and let's get rid of some of the higher frequencies in the reverb, so we'll bring this down. We'll also increase the decay time so that it rings out a little bit longer, and maybe we'll increase the sides a little bit. Let's hear what that sounds like. And we'll bring down the volume of the reverb tail as well. Okay, let's complement our kick drum with a subwoofer, a sub bass. So let's grab Vital, insert it on a new track, and this one will be kind of similar to that kick drum that we programmed a few weeks ago, in my, which I have a previous video on. So change the waveform to basic shapes, and the sine wave can work for this sort of instrument, but to get a little bit more presence on speakers that don't have a lot of ability to reproduce low end, we're gonna change the shape to the one right next to the default sine wave. And that adds a couple higher order harmonics that you can see here that will actually come through like laptop speakers and headphones more effectively. So you can hear the difference. So now when we play a bass note, let's insert our MIDI clip. We'll pick a low note like F0, and our pattern will be an 8th note followed by 2/16. So duplicate that. A couple more things we want to do here to make the subwoofer have a sort of punchy, low percussive sound is we're going to add a pitch envelope onto this basic sub-bass sound. So change your LFO 1 to a shape kind of like this, switch it to envelope mode, put it on the pitch of the oscillator 1. We'll go into the matrix and we'll bring this down to 24 since we don't need it to go that high up. Now let's tweak this. We'll solo the sub bass so we only hear that. Okay. We'll add a little bit more punch by changing the the sustain level of envelope 1 down a bit and then shrinking the decay time so we get a sort of punchy pluck at the beginning. And then we'll accent the attack a little bit more with some with a white noise layer. So turn on the white noise oscillator, bring the level to 0, put LFO 1 on that level. And actually, let's change it to pink noise because it has less high frequency energy, so we'll have a kind of darker kick sound, which can work well with this genre. So now we have this. All right, and one more step, we'll get a little bit of distortion with filter 1. So make sure that oscillator 1 and the noise oscillator are both going to filter 1. Enable it, reduce the resonance, and bring up the drive a bit. Okay, and as always, we need to sidechain the kick to the sub. So click on the track with the subwoofer and group it into a new track with Control G. And then we're going to put a compressor on that group and sidechain it to the kick as per usual. Okay. And let's adjust it. Check that in the mixer. Let's cut some more highs out of the reverb tail. All right, now let's bring in our vocal sample. So I have this sample from a Gotham Chess video, and to start, I'm just gonna take this one piece here.
It's not the idea. It's not the idea. The idea is to sacrifice.
Right there. Okay.
The idea is to sacrifice.
Clip that. So we're just going to use this segment here for now. And here's what that sounds like by itself.
The idea is to sacrifice.
So for techno, I want to go for kind of a darker sound, especially in the vocal. So let's do a couple things. First, select the clip and bring down the pitch by a half step.
The idea is to sacrifice.
And then we'll bring in a frequency shifter and lower the frequency of the sample a little bit further.
The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice.
All right. Let's put an EQ after that to trim out some of the low end.
The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice.
And finally, we'll add a multi-brand compressor on it using a preset called OTT. And this will help both even out the sound and bring up the high frequencies a little bit more so the sample sounds more prominent. But we don't need to overdo it. We can set it to an amount less than 100%.
The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice.
All right, perfect. We're going to use our vocal sample as a prelude to the drop to kind of set things up for the main drama of our song. So to do that, I want to use this first half of the sample where
the idea
it says the idea, and I'm going to put that 4 measures before the drop, and I'll put the other part of it 2 measures before the drop. So we get this.
The idea is to sacrifice.
All right. Let's also bring up the reverb and delay sends so we get a little bit more atmosphere for our sample.
Is to sacrifice. Is to sacrifice.
All right. Now, one more thing we can do to make these vocals sound more ghost-like and swirling and to create a sound that creates anticipation in the listener is we can use a trick called reverse reverb. Basically what that is we put a reverb effect on just the beginning part of a sound. We set the time of the reverb to be very long, then we render the reverb, and then we reverse it so that you get this sort of swelling vocal sound. To apply the reverse reverb, we want to make sure to keep all these effects that we have on the sample. So we'll just do some resampling here. So create a new audio track, arm it for recording, change its configuration to resampling, and press F9 to record.
The idea
And this one
is to sacrifice.
All right, and now we'll start by taking just a little piece of this first sample, maybe to here. Perfect. Put a reverb effect on it, put the dry wet all the way, turn the pre-delay down, turn the low cut and high cut off, and increase the decay time considerably. We'll also bring up the size in stereo just to make it more spacious sounding. Right. And then right click on the track, select freeze track, and then do that again and press flatten track, and that'll give us the reverb tail. Select both clips, turn off warp mode, press Ctrl J to consolidate, and then double click the gain to bring it back up to unity. We'll be lowering this volume too in a second here. So now let's put it, let's say a measure leading up to our first vocal hit. So we'll grab, let's say a measure here. Put that there, reverse it, drag this corner to make it swell up a bit, and then bring the volume way down.
The idea.
Now let's make a reverse reverb for the other one. All right, for this one, let's go with 2 measures worth of delay, of reverse reverb. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Reverse it. Same game plan there.
The idea is to sacrifice.
So now we've got our initial vocal sample and ambience to set the stage for our drop. And usually we'd start off with a drop with a sort of downer sound to release some of the tension and to kick things off. And one way we can do that is if we put a clap sound right before the start of the drop, and then we apply a very long reverb tail to it so it rings out. So let's grab a clap sample. Perfect. We'll put it on the last 8th note just before the drop hits. That'll sound good rhythmically. Trim this tail, then put a reverb effect on the channel. And now we're going to automate the dry wet so that at the beginning, the clap comes through nice and strong, and then the reverb tail rings out. And we also want to put this in the same group as the sub so that the side chaining will create this rhythmic pumping sound on the tail of the clap. So let's right click the dry wet knob and automate it from 0 to 100% like this. And we'll give it a nice long tail. Big stereo field, big size. Maybe bring in some more of the highs. Let's see what that sounds like. And to save some CPU, we can right click, freeze the track, and then flatten it. Now we can bring this clap down a little bit in volume, and we still have the nice long, powerful reverb tail. Let's keep going. So our whole drop is going to last 32 bars. So let's see, 8, 16. So it's going to go to here. So let's add a locator to indicate where the drop ends and where it starts. All right, so let's duplicate our first 4 measures of kick drum. Same with the bass. And we're going to add a closed hi-hat next. Techno tends to be a rather sparse genre. It has these stark, austere soundscapes. They often don't have a snare drum because they play other sound effects in the mid-range, and so we want to leave that space open. But we do like our closed hi-hats in techno. So let's find a closed hi-hat we like and add it to our drum rack. Okay, and we'll make a pretty simple pattern here because later in our drop, we want to add more 16th notes to increase the complexity and the motion in our hi-hat sound. So maybe we'll do something like... Okay. Let's keep going. But before we start adding more drums to this next set of 4 beats, let's add 1/8 note on the last 8th note in the first set of 4 measures on the kick drum, and this will create like a very tiny drum fill to kind of set up the next short segment of music. So that sounds like this. Later in the second half of our drop. And by the way, let's bring up some reverb on our drum track and maybe bring down the closed hi-hat a little bit. Okay, what else can we add? Well, in techno, you often have a kind of distorted open hi-hat sound. So we can layer that in here in our third group of 4 measures to kind of heighten the intensity further. So let's find an open hat that we like, load that in the drum rack, and let's also put some saturation on that as well. That's often typically heard in techno, a kind of crispy, distorted open hat sound. Push it even harder. All right, and bring down the output a little bit. Now we're gonna put it in the traditional open hat position on every other 8th note, but you'll see that we already have closed hat notes there. We don't want them to compete for headroom, so what we're going to do is add a little bit of an attack to the hi-hat to create a space for the transient of the closed hi-hat to come through, and that'll help these sounds kind of glue together while adding the intensity of the open hi-hat to our track. So let's copy that, go into the drum rack and increase the fade in for the open hat sample a little bit. That sounds like this. Let's also add some more motion to the 8th note hi-hats. Maybe we can start just using this pattern throughout, like this. All right, and then we've got one more group of 4 here before we bring our vocal back in to kind of heighten the atmosphere of our drop. So let's take the closed hi-hats up a step further. We'll add one in here on the second 16th note of each group. Copy that. Let's pull out the kick drum at the end of the last measure of the drop, before the drop, to create a sense of anticipation. So to do that, let's go back to our drum rack and let's put a utility on just the dry channel, because we still want the ambience from the reverb tail to come through and create, some atmosphere. So we'll put a utility there, right click on the gain, and bring it down to 0 just for the last measure, before the drop. That'll sound like this. Okay. Since we already have this nice clap ambient thing here at the beginning of our drop, why not reuse it to start off the next section? So we can just copy what we already have here into so that the clap lines up at that final 8th note before the drop comes in. So let's select this motion thing. Yeah, there we go. So we get this. All right. Let's also remove the hi-hats that would be playing on that clap just to create enough space in the mix for the clap. Get this. All right. Copy the sub for our next section. Copy the existing drums for the next section as well. Make sure to remove the utility automation so that the kick doesn't cut out before we want it to. And a couple more things we can do to really enhance the turnaround right before the second half of our drop. Let's go to the reverb tail on the kick drum, and we'll add a filter sweep for those last 4 measures so that it sounds like, so it creates like this rising sound from the reverb tail. So to do that, grab an auto filter effect, put it just after the reverb, and switch it to high pass mode, and bring the filter frequency all the way down. Also bring the resonance down, and change the filter type from clean to OSR. This will give us a drive knob so we can add some more grit to the sound. So right click on the filter frequency, click show automation, and we'll do a filter sweep for the last, let's say 2 measures before the drop. So put some nodes there. And then we're also going to automate our resonance up in the same fashion. A little goes a long way. And same thing with the drive. And now we'll tweak those settings to taste. All right, let's go with that for now. Put those on the wrong part of our drum loop. So let me put this back in the right place. Okay. All right, let's also start bringing our vocal back into play. So just before the drop, I'm going to change up the rhythm a little bit. So it says the idea is to sacrifice. We'll put it measure 31, and then they're at measure 32. Here's what that sounds like.
The idea is to sacrifice.
Now we'll start repeating this vocal sample as a main theme for the rest of the drop. So here's what this sounds like. We'll just duplicate that. And we'll keep going forward with our sub bass and our drum loop.
The idea is to sacrifice.
So let's put the vocal sample in the sidechain group so it also steps out of the way of the kick drum.
The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice.
All right. So now we're in the second half of our drop. Second half. Let's amp up the intensity further by adding a ride cymbal to our drum rack. This is a great way to get some consistent high frequency drum sounds to kind of heighten the intensity of the drop. So let's grab a ride cymbal that we like. That sounds good. So there's a few ways to do this, but a typical way is just to put the ride on every quarter note. So that's what we'll do here. Bring down the volume a bit. And also, just to make it even further in the background, let's add another reverb just on the ride. And that'll help make it sound even more washy and atmospheric. Bring the dry wet back in the dry direction a little bit.
The idea is to sacrifice. The idea.
Let's join these clips together so we can duplicate our ride cymbal more easily. There we go.
The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice.
All right. Let's copy that as well. Copy the sub, and we can also go ahead and copy our clap to take us home there. Right there. All right. Let's also make the vocal a little more interesting. So after this first half, let's start adding in a couple more clips from the sample itself. So maybe we could grab like this very beginning that sounds like the. We'll put it. Well, first of all, let's duplicate this. And now let's add the here. Put it on, let's say, the 8th note here and the 8th note there.
Is to sacrifice. The idea. The idea is to.
A little bit, so it's just the.
The idea is to sacrifice.
All right, let's grab a chunk of sacrifice to create a contrasting element.
Sacrifice.
Right here. This. We'll put it on the last 2/16 here. A slightly different piece.
Is to sacrifice.
Maybe we'll just grab this ack. Put that there.
The
All right, let's see what that sounds like.
is to sacrifice. The idea.
Bring down the volumes of these clips a little bit by selecting them both and bring down the gain.
The idea is to.
And let's repeat that same idea here in the next group. And in the one after that. And in this one. All right.
The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice.
Pick a slightly different sample just for some contrast. So maybe
Sacrifice.
this. for just 1/8 note. Here we go. And grab the double 16th note pattern and put that here at measure 46. And that way, we've got kind of an evolving pattern that has some variation throughout it, and kind of it increases in density and intensity in the second half, so there's a clear progression to it. So let's hear what that sounds like.
The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice.
All right. Let's add a riser sound to kind of bring the energy of a drop to a conclusion after taking the energy level up. So let's open up Vital. Put it on a new MIDI track. And disable oscillator 1 and turn on the sample oscillator, which will just be white noise by default. Make sure it's going into filter 1. And turn on filter 1 and change the blend to right in the middle so it's a bandpass filter. Then enable key tracking so that the filter cutoff frequency is at the same note that we play on the MIDI keyboard. And then increase the resonance a little bit, which will give a tone to the riser sound that matches the note that we're playing on the MIDI keyboard. So let's say we want the riser to last for 8 measures. We'll create one long note that lasts 8 measures long. And since I have the sub playing an F, I'm also going to make the riser play an F note. Drag that out for the whole 8 measures. Sounds like this. So now let's make that, let's automate the filter cutoff so that we get a rising noise sound over those 8 measures. So go to LFO 1, change it to envelope mode, change the frequency to 1/8, and then just make it do a straight ramp. Then apply LFO 1 to the cutoff of filter 1 and maybe bring the max value of LFO 1 down to, let's say, 60. Here's what that sounds like now. So you get this nice rising sound. We also won't want that to be sidechained to the kick drum to give it that rhythmic pumping sound. So go ahead and move the noise riser into your sidechain group. And now let's hear that in context.
To sacrifice, the idea is to sacrifice, the idea is to sacrifice, the idea is to sacrifice.
All right. Let's add a finishing touch, one last sample right at the end. I'm going to delete this one. And I'm going to go back to the original to where he says the rook.
It's check white tip the rook
Right there. All right, so grab that, copy the sample. Let's put it on a new audio track. And that sounds like this.
is to sacrifice the rook.
And let's add a long reverb and delay tail there since it's kind of the conclusion of our drop so far. So we'll put a reverb effect on it, and then down the dry wet, but increase the decay time, increase the size, and let's also put a delay on there. Put the delay before the reverb, maybe set it to 8. Bring down the filter a little bit. We get this.
The rook.
We can soften that last K a little bit by fading out the clip slightly.
The rook.
All right. Let's add that same kick drum turnaround at the end of the third group of 8 measures, so it's kind of symmetrical with our first group.
The idea is to sacrifice the idea.
All right. And now we can also make our closed hi-hat pattern evolve a little bit more in the last segment by adding in the 16th note that's missing, currently missing from the beginning of each group. We'll go ahead and add that in. Actually, we'll just copy it from here, duplicate it till the end. And in the first half, we pulled out the kick drum for 1 measure. So this time, let's do it for 2 measures. So we'll go back to that same utility on the dry chain for the kick drum. Dry chain. Oops, looks like the earlier one got deleted, so let's just add that back. And then add one here at the end that lasts for 2 beats. Sounds like this.
The idea is to sacrifice the rock.
We can also freeze our noise riser, so since we're happy with how it sounds, so that'll save us some CPU as well. All right. And let's go ahead and put those reverse reverbs before our samples here at the end of the first half of our drop as well, to create some continuity and also some more interest. So let's put that here. And then we'll need to shorten this one to be 1/4 note long. There we go. Make sure it's not muted. Make sure it's grouped in with the side chaining group.
The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice. The idea is to sacrifice.
Let's put a limiter on our master channel and hear the whole thing together. I couldn't help myself, so I made a few more tweaks and did some light mixing, so here's what the final version sounds like.
The idea is to sacrifice.
So now you know some of the basic techniques for building a drop around a vocal sample, which you can use in your next viral remix. Along the way, we covered saturation, reverse reverb, side chaining, filter sweeps, sub-bass programming, riser sound design, and techno genre conventions. If you've enjoyed our time here together, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you here next time. Happy producing!